the doctrines that I'm opposed to are predicated on, well, one assumption they're predicated on, it's probably the primary assumption, is that the best way to view history is as the domination of a tyrannical male patriarchy, and that's true also particularly of the West, which is a doctrine I find absolutely unpalatable and historically absurd, biologically ridiculous, and ungrateful, among other things.
Who's ungrateful, sorry, in that? Who is being ungrateful?
Look at what you have.
Right.
You live in the best society that's ever been created. You know, I was reading about some Indonesians.
Do you mean me as a woman or me as a 21st
us.
century person in the world?
I mean us, yeah.
I mean, I'm incredibly grateful for what I have, but to me the
then
project of politics
is construction of a tyrannical patriarchy. You're grateful for the productions of a tyrannical patriarchy. How does that make sense?
Because I think life is good. I think it could be better. That's what being
fine.
a progressive
That's a
means.
perfectly reasonable proposition.
But I guess
that isn't commensurate with your claim that you're the beneficiary of a tyrannical patriarchy.
Why not?
How can it be good if it's the consequence of a tyrannical patriarchy? Tyranny isn't good, is it? I mean, that's the definition of tyranny. Something that isn't good, and yet it's produced all these things that you're grateful for. Like, doesn't that contradiction bother you? Where did what was good come from?
I think I'm benefiting actually from a lot of things that I don't support, that are unearned privileges in my life. I think that's absolutely true.
Like your job?
Like I have a very good job. I had a loving family.
Quit.
Well, I don't think that's going to do the world any good, is it?
That's a hell of a fine rationalization for your privileged position.
Oh well, fair enough. But if
you could trade it off with someone who's less privileged.
I could.
That'd be a start.
I could do that, but I don't want to, and I won't, and I don't think
Why
I should
not?
be expected to.
Why not? Is it okay for you to occupy a position of privilege in the patriarchal tyranny? And if it is it because you're female, or is it just because it's convenient?
Let me tell you my political philosophy. I guess I'm a social democrat. So what I believe is that you should, if you have a good life, you should try and pass that on. I believe in a progressive redistributive tax system, for example. It was once said by Lord Mandelson in British politics, but New Labour was okay with people being filthy rich as long as they paid their taxes. Now, I'm kind of less okay with people being filthy rich. But
Define filthy rich.
Well, I think I would leave that
You're probably in the top 0.1% of people who've ever lived on the planet. That would constitute filthy rich by historical standards.
Okay, but I'm not
sure
that I'm
going
going
the line exactly?
Be able to help the Neanderthals at this point, really, by giving up some money. But this is my point, is that what I believe I believe in a structure in which people who have had a good life and had lots of advantages should pay that back, pay that forwards, which I think is the message that you preach as well, right? You have responsibilities. And if you've had, like us, a lot of advantages in life.
Civilization as a tyrannical patriarchy.
It's not purely a tyrannical patriarchy,
That's for sure.
Is it?
It's purely not.
Right.
And that's exactly the issue.
But why
because
would you deal with moral
when you describe it as a
absolutes
tyrannical patriarchy, then you make a case that it's purely that. And that's exactly what's ungrateful.
Why
it's not purely that at all.
Why is saying that something has elements of this make the same as it is purely that?
That isn't what's being said. Merely to define it as a patriarchy implies unidimensionality. And to insist that that's also tyrannical doesn't offer a balanced viewpoint at all.
Well, I think that's probably where, your disagreement comes with this, which is because I do not see it in that way. I do not see that as univariate at all. I see it as one element.
Then why call it a patriarchy?
Because it describes an overarching structure.
Does it?
Yeah.
What if the patriarchy is fundamentally composed of women? Is it still a patriarchy?
No, that would be a matriarchy.
Would it? So let's say we take a patriarchal structure, like the medical profession, and we fill it primarily with women. Is it then a matriarchal structure? What makes it a patriarchy to begin with? Is it the hierarchical structure? Is it the fact that it's mostly men? Is it the sociological structure? Or is it the fact that it's mostly men?
Well, I think that's really interesting because male primary school teachers, for example, only 15% of them are men, and I interviewed some of them for my book. And you know what? They report exactly the same things that women do in male-dominated offices, right? They say, people have conversations that I feel excluded from. I feel stigmatized, like I shouldn't be here. People look at me askance when I say I'm a primary school teacher and I'm a man. You know, they kind of reel back. We all make those implicit associations. So
if it is a structure that's dominated by women, then it's also a tyrannical patriarchy.
I think in that case, then men have a way of, they should be able to complain about the fact that a very female-dominated office leaves them feeling out too. Yeah, feeling left out too.
So how do we get something that isn't a tyrannical patriarchy? If it's composed of women, then it's a tyrannical patriarchy, and if it's composed of men, it's a tyrannical patriarchy. We're kind of out of options.
Right, but, or you could have an office in which a blend of people of both sexes work.
So if it's 50-50, then it's not a tyrannical patriarchy.
No, not 50-50. I'm saying that people...
40-60.
I'm saying that there is clearly, when there's only 15% of male primary school teachers, they do feel marginalised and excluded. So
you think the defining hallmark of a tyrannical social structure is the predominance of one gender, and if that was relatively equalized, then all of a sudden it would be a free and open institution.
I don't think that male primary school teachers are being tyrannized. I do think they are being marginalized, and I do think that they feel excluded and stressed by that.
So what do you do about that?
Well, this is what I mean. I think actually, and I'm surprised you don't agree with me on this, that actually having more male primary school teachers would be a really good thing, because boys need role models, actually. People, particularly boys who don't have a father figure in their life, that's really important for them to have a stable adult who shows them what it's like to be a man around the place.
Could be, but you shouldn't achieve it as a consequence of preferential hiring.
The problem is with assuming that the fundamental way that you should categorize people is with their group identity. Obviously, we all belong to groups. The issue is whether or not the individual identity is primary and the group identity is secondary, or the group identity is primary and the individual identity is secondary. If you're a proponent, for example, of equality of outcome, of quotas, then you de facto accept the proposition that it's the group identity that is primary, and there's all sorts of dangers that are associated with that far outweigh whatever good you're likely to do.
Maybe you just think that women should be equally represented in the decision-making fora of our nation. Maybe that's really just about having proper equality in a body that's meant to be representative.
Well, I do believe that women should have... I don't understand your question, I guess.
I guess you don't. That's pretty obvious, unfortunately.
Well, how about if you phrase it more clearly, instead of just insulting me? Look at it this way. Let's talk about quotas for a minute. So there's a very wide array of jobs that are fundamentally done by men. 99.9% of bricklayers are men. Should we have quotas for women?
Is bricklaying representative democracy?
That has nothing to do with the question. The question is if there's evidence of structural inequality and oppression because women aren't precisely represented at 50% in all professions at all levels, then why don't we have a conversation about having women represented in all professions at all levels?
Well,
why do we talk about the C-suite, for example? Why do we talk about politics and positions of power? Why don't we talk about it across the board?
Okay.
I see a backlash against masculinity and a sense that there's something toxic about
masculinity. But what is this idea of being why is society overly feminized?
Well, I didn't ever say that society was overly feminized. So if we're going to discuss my views, we should use my actual words. I believe that there's a danger in our society at the moment of making the assumption that our culture, for example, is a tyrannical patriarchy, which it is in some small part, and that any active engagement on the part of young men in particular is indistinguishable from an unacceptable power and dominance drive, which I don't believe.
But surely
all of that is inappropriate and incorrect.
If much of the power and authority over a very long historical period has lain with men, isn't it only inevitable that some men will get a little hacked off when women are given a stab at something approaching equality?
Well, that could be inevitable, but that doesn't make it right, and it's certainly not something that I support. So
So you think men's resentment is more important than women's effort to attain equality?
I'm not in favor of resentment at all. I think that if you're resentful, something's definitely wrong. Either you need to grow the hell up and take stock of your life, or you have some things to say to people that you haven't been saying.
You say science undoubtedly shows us that men and women have different traits, and there's a lot of science to back you up on that. But you say that because of that, men are hardwired to achieve success and to be successful in a way that women are not.
No, not at all. I've never said anything like that. I've said that there are biological differences between men and women that express themselves in temperament and in occupational choice, and that any attempt to enforce equality of outcome is unwarranted and ill-advised as a consequence.
And yet some of the most successful societies, judged on contentment indices or indeed material success, are those, for example, in Scandinavia.
Where the temperamental differences between men and women are larger than they are in any other society.
Well, so you point out that in Scandinavia many more women choose to be health workers than engineers, for example.
It's not what I say, it's what the large-scale scientific investigation has revealed.
Fair enough. But equally, Scandinavia is full of societies, one could point to Norway, Norway, where they've made a specific legislative effort, for example, with a quota of 40% of women on corporate boards or a quota for women to be in parliament.
Right.
They've specifically engaged in social engineering, and it seems to be working, and it seems to
Doesn't seem to be working
well,
particularly.
forgive me, but Norway is top of every contentment index that we see across the world.
Well, okay, so first of all, Norway has plenty of oil money, which is definitely contributing to that. And second, it depends on what you mean by working. There's no evidence, for example, that the legislation that was designed to increase the number of women on boards has produced any movement whatsoever in the number of women who hold managerial and administrative positions in Norway. The theory was that as societies became more egalitarian, that men and women would become more the same. But that isn't what's happened. What's happened is the biggest differences between men and women now, temperamentally and in terms of their own interest, have manifested themselves in the Scandinavian countries. And so what that will mean is that men and women will make different choices in occupation if you let them have free choice. Now, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to stop that from happening? Is that the feminist perspective?
Let's get back to a word I used before and ask you directly. Do you approve of, do you think it's a dangerous word, equality? This word equality. What
I
is your...
approve of equality of opportunity, but I think that equality of outcome considerations are detestable and dangerous beyond belief.